The youngest of two sons, Matej Čurko was born into a middle-class family, but his parents divorced when he was a little child. Čurko and his brother, with whom they were not particularly close, were cared for by their mother and grandmother, despite the fact that they had regular contact with their father. Čurko did not have any reported illnesses or injuries when he was a preschooler, and he breezed through kindergarten with no problems. He even joined a school for academically brilliant students because he was gifted in technical areas. He was not well liked in school, but he was also not tormented or humiliated in any way. Cycling, playing guitar or drums, and utilizing computers and programming them were among of his lonely pastimes, as were playing video games. His professors referred to him as a rebel and a provocateur because he had difficulty maintaining respect for the authority figures in his life. At the age of 13, he stabbed his 11-year-old neighbor with a knife, inflicting major injuries on the young child. The little Čurko was moved to a mental center in Košice, where he remained for more than a month after his ordeal there. Following that, he was admitted to the Children's Psychiatric Hospital in Ranin, where he was tested and found to have an IQ of 116, which was far higher than the national norm. After completing elementary school, Čurko went on to successfully complete a vocational school with a GCSE before being drafted into the army as a technical expert, a position that he completed successfully as well as he could have. Following his discharge from the army, Čurko sought employment in the technical industry, and he also developed an interest in two new hobbies, firearms and combat martial arts. Eventually, he was hired as the chief of the information technology department of an unidentified insurance company. One of the most unusual aspects of his life was that he spent a significant amount of time submitting criminal charges with the public prosecutor's office, which addressed everything from parking concerns to high-level politics. When it came to Čurko, one of the things that stood out was that he never exhibited any interest in the opposite gender, finally meeting a girlfriend when he was 30 years old with whom he had 2 children. According to later theories, he exhibited numerous signs of psychopathy, a dislike for social contact, a preference for solitude, emotional coldness, a lack of empathy, an inability to express his feelings, and a conflict with authority, as well as necrophilic sadism and a schizoid personality disorder, among other conditions. The murders took place when he was living in Čurko and traveling to the Kajak forest on a regular basis, where he would meet and kill the victims. He met them primarily through suicide forums, where he went by the screen name Orion 218. The victims, the majority of whom had suicidal tendencies and publicly expressed their intention to terminate their lives, gave their consent to be slain by the cannibal in exchange for his services. It was necessary for the duo to meet up in the woods, where he would drug the victim before stabbing them in the heart. Then he would cut up the body with a meat cleaver or one of his many knives, masking the rotten flesh smell with pepper and cooking it until it was ready for consumption. His joy would then be to consume any portion of the body he liked, keeping the remainder in his refrigerator in Kajak and burying the dead in shallow graves on his land. There were only 2 bodies discovered during the search of his property, those of Elena Jakova, 30, from Orovsk-Vesel, who went missing on June 23, 2010, and Lucia Uchnerova, 20, from Snina, who went missing on September 3, 2010. Elena Jakova was 30 years old when she went missing on June 23, 2010. Both ladies were suffering from mental health concerns, with Lucia having attempted suicide in 2008. They had both contacted Čurko via the internet. Both of their remains were eventually discovered in shallow graves on the land of Čurko. An anonymous Swiss person had tipped off the authorities after responding to one of Čurko's posters asking someone who wanted to die and then be devoured. But, at the very least, the Swiss national expressed interest in Čurko's offer before turning himself into the authorities. Before agreeing to meet in Slovakia, the two exchanged a couple of emails with one another. Čurko was quite precise in communicating what he desired and what he intended to do. He was also very precise about the type of clothing he wanted the Swiss man to wear when they finally met in person in the email exchanges. He went into detail about how he planned to drug the man before stabbing him in the heart, according to Čurko. In his description, he said how he would next chop his body into various parts and begin eating him. In order to conceal the inevitable stink of rotting flesh that would otherwise catch the notice of passing hikers or animals looking for food in the woods, he would sprinkle pepper over the areas of his body that he would not be eating straight immediately. Prior to traveling to Slovenia to meet his would-be assassin, the Swiss man had second thoughts and contacted the police, who were notified. Čurko was suspected of being a killer by the time the incident occurred, according to the local police. According to a spokeswoman for the Kajak Police Department, the department was already aware of his internet postings. They, on the other hand, chose to gather additional evidence against him before putting him in jail. An undercover agent took on the role of the Swiss man and boarded a train to the area to complete the mission. After arriving, he proceeded to travel into the woods to meet Čurko at the predetermined location. Čurko had requested that he attend the meeting in the clothes Čurko had requested, with a wire inside his shirt so that police could listen in and interfere if necessary. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that Čurko had not only painstakingly planned his method of murder and consumption of his victim, but he had also prepared himself for the possibility of being assaulted. After being identified by the agent and making preparations to detain him, he immediately drew one of the 4 weapons he was registered to carry and threatened to shoot him. He was shot many times by a sniper from a special police unit who had been hiding nearby at the time. In his final moments before collapsing to the ground, he was able to shoot and critically injure one of the SWAT team members. After being transported to a nearby hospital, the injured officer underwent emergency surgery. After a few days in the intensive care unit, he was able to make a full recovery. However, Čurko was unable to make the trip. The 5 shots he fired caused serious organ damage as well as shattered bones in his arms and face as a result of the trauma. He died on the operating table less than 48 hours after being shot by the sniper in the back of the neck. Before dying from his injuries, Čurko had left behind a gruesome trail that led police to suspect him in many dozen missing person cases. Čurko's death prevented police from questioning him before he died from his injuries. According to the Slovakian Daily The Case, he had arrived to meet his intended victim with a knapsack stuffed with sedatives, bottles of vodka, spices, probably to hide the odor of rotting flesh, a gas lighter, gloves, and other personal belongings. In addition to carving tools, knives, and rope, he had a large armory of pistols and shotguns, as well as lots of ammunition, stashed away in the woods. Another item discovered in the crime scene was a candle and a makeshift shrine, though it was unclear what form of spiritual practice Čurko was associated with when he killed and devoured his victims. There was never any discussion with anyone, either online or in person, about him being involved in a religious or cult activity, which could have explained why his improvised altar might have been a part of him performing his ritual of dissecting and devouring human bodies. The discovery of the bodies of 2 ladies in the woods, on the other hand, was the most unsettling revelation. The police were alerted by a file Čurko had stored on his personal computer, which contained the GPS coordinates of the location where the victims were discovered. The dismembered bodies were discovered in a shallow grave in the woodland near Čurko's altar, wrapped in plastic foil by the police. Police recovered some of their body parts in the family freezer, as well as other evidence of their involvement. One woman was completely naked, but the other woman's clothes had not been taken off. The police were able to determine that the 2 women were the subjects of a photograph of body parts that Čurko had given to his intended victim in Switzerland. One of the bodies was identified as belonging to a 20-year-old Slovenian woman who had been missing for more than a year after DNA sample and other testing were performed. The young women had a history of mental illness, and in 2008, they made an unsuccessful suicide attempt. Aside from her cries for assistance, she made it plain that she intended to commit suicide through her Facebook posts. Čurko allegedly zeroed in on the young woman's online identity and persuaded her to meet him in a forest near his hamlet, according to reports. Čurko allegedly outlined in unequivocal terms what he wanted to do to her in his emails and chat messages, similar to what he attempted to do to the Swiss man in his emails and chat communications. Following Čurko's death, Interpol has worked to establish solid linkages between Čurko and a slew of unidentified people who have gone missing. According to the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera, Čurko's second life as a suspected cannibal may be linked to the disappearances of at least 30 women in Italy alone. The ladies, who were between the ages of 25 and 28, went missing between 2009 and 2011, when Čurko was killed. Their bodies, on the other hand, have not been discovered. The Corriere della Sera also reported that a person from Italy was referenced in an email discussion between Čurko and the Swiss man, but they were unable to corroborate the name of the individual mentioned in the exchange. Investigators have also been unable to gain access to the entirety of Čurko's web history. In Slovakia, internet service providers are prohibited from preserving email and other electronic messages for longer than 2 years under the terms of the country's laws. As a result, authorities will be unable to investigate the majority of Čurko's online behavior prior to 2009. After looking through Čurko's computer data and other evidence he left behind, police have likewise remained tight-lipped about what they have learned about his psychological state. The absence of any public declarations from Čurko's family members could also be a contributing factor to his exceedingly atypical behavior. In the settlement, there are little evidence of Čurko's previous existence, as the residents were unfamiliar with him before he became famous around the world as an alleged cannibal. Čurko's wife and children have apparently left the village, according to reports. Police have removed Čurko's improvised shrine from the woodland, as well as the instruments he used to hack up bodies, and have transported the bodies of the 2 young women who were killed there. According to the most recent evidence, Čurko may have died with a large number of secrets regarding his cannibalism practice that investigators will never be able to learn.